On YouTube, Jor93 writes in and says, how to make baklava. So today, we are going to answer your question and show you just how easy it is to make baklava from scratch. Today's sponsor is Nuts About Granola, and you can check them out online at nutsaboutgranola.com. Nuts About Granola is a mother-daughter duo who produces some of the most delicious granola I've ever had. This is their Plain Jane. It's a peanut butter type of granola. It has a really nice peanut butter flavor that just comes on at the finish. It's not super crunchy, not mushy. It has a nice texture in between the two. Really tasty. Check them out online at nutsaboutgranola.com and give their granola a go today. I have a confession for you. Baklava is perhaps my favorite of desserts. It's not something that's new to me, but I'm sure it might be new to a bunch of you out there. Baklava is basically a pastry that's light and airy and flaky and contains nuts, and it's from the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern area of the world. Like many things in that region of the world, baklava has a history which is shared by a lot of different countries, in that a lot of different countries claim to have invented it. My research says that the Assyrians kind of created it in the 8th century, and it was during the Ottoman Empire that it really got refined and finally made its way to Western civilizations in the 18th century. Regardless of the exact origins, it definitely comes from the Mediterranean Middle Eastern areas, and each region has a small variation to how they prepare it. Maybe they use different nuts or a different style of pastry slightly or a different finishing, which brings us to the basic ingredients. And it's really just three. You have dough, and it's usually this stuff called phyllo dough. Phyllo is a Greek word that means leaf, which has to do with how thin it is. It's super, super thin, almost like tissue paper dough. There's also a nut of some sort. I'm using pistachios in today's recipe, but people use walnuts, they use almonds, they use all different types of nuts, and I think that a lot of it had to do with the nuts that were available. And then generally there is some sort of sweetening agent or some syrup poured on the top after it's baked. Sometimes that's a simple sugar, sometimes it's a mixture of honey. But with those ingredients, how really do you go wrong? They're all delicious. The dessert is often served with some tea. It's a great after-meal snack, or you can put them in a plastic bag in your pocket and eat them all throughout the day as you're walking around Brooklyn, like I do. A lot of people are intimidated of making baklava, and I think that that's because phyllo dough perceivably is hard to work with. With the right technique and with proper preparation, I don't think that it's really that hard. In fact, I think it's one of the easiest things to bake. It's just a little bit repetitive. So get your ingredients together, prep them ahead of time, and then assemble all at once. You'll be good to go. To make baklava, you first want to heat up an oven to 350 degrees, and you'll also want some phyllo dough. I got my phyllo dough made and frozen at my local grocery store. It's pretty easy and inexpensive to find. It'll be in the frozen pastry aisle. First, you're going to need to measure your phyllo dough out to the size of the container that you're baking in. So I'm using a baking tray. Open up your phyllo dough into the baking tray and kind of push it into the edges, then use a knife to cut it to size. The scraps of phyllo dough should be set to the side, and you should eat them while you're assembling the rest of the recipe. In a food processor, put about 2 cups of pistachios and process them until they're pretty smooth. Some chunks are acceptable. Then put those pistachios in a bowl with about a ½ cup of sugar and a teaspoon and a half of ground cardamom. Then mix it together. You'll also need to get some melted butter as well as a brush to brush the butter on. Brush the inside of your baking sheet so it's totally lubricated with butter. Then add your first paper-thin layer of phyllo dough. Now brush butter on top. Then another layer of phyllo dough. Then butter. Then phyllo dough. Then butter. Then nuts. So that's basically the pattern. Phyllo, butter, phyllo, butter, phyllo, butter, nuts. Phyllo, butter, phyllo, butter, phyllo, butter, nuts. Simple. And you do this until you get to the end, and you don't put nuts at the end yet. Then get the baklava and cut it into diamonds or squares. Now just put it into the oven for about 20 minutes or until it is golden brown. While it's cooking, you're going to make a simple syrup. Put a pan over the stove and add 1½ cups granulated sugar, 1 cup of water and a half a cup of rose water. Bring it to a boil and cook for about 15 minutes, then remove it from the heat and set aside. Finally, remove your baklava from the oven and evenly pour your rose water syrup all over the top. Sprinkle some of your remaining pistachio over the top and let it sit for at least 3 hours or overnight. Baklava can be stored for about a week at room temperature providing it is covered, but you know as well as I know that it won't last that long in your household. Tune in tomorrow for another What's This Food? Be sure to check out our sponsor, nutsaboutgranola.com, and if you have something you want me to cover, post it in the comments below. See you tomorrow.